Hi, Kat here for Lightwave Digital. In this video, I want to go back to something that we were talking about with the Jitter tool and how that can be used to create a star field. The Jitter tool is very handy for randomizing geometry in a very mild or extreme way, and we're going to use the extreme way to create that star field. Now, when people go and do this initially, they forget one additional step that needs to be taken care of before the star field will show up in Lightwave layout. So let's go through the creation of creating a ball, which will be the base for our field. We'll just hold down the control key, select in any window area, and we're going to change it to tessellation. We're going to give this a little bit of a crank up. We're going to go 8. I don't want to go overboard with this because once we have one ball, let's go 25 meters. There we go. Because once we have one ball, we can use a copy of that, rotate it, and do a few other things with it. So here we've got a ball. Great, fantastic. Now what? Well, we need to jitter it. So we're going to go Modify tab, and we're going to jitter it, and we're going to use pretty serious extreme on this. We're going to go like 10 meters by 10 meters by 10 meters, just using the Gaussian filter. Okay, so now we've got all this going on here. So all these polygons have shot off into various directions, and they've given us some randomness to our points, but looks like hell, obviously. If we took this into Lightwave layout and tried to render it, we'd have a bunch of polygons rather than just a bunch of individual points. So the next step here is we're going to kill these polygons, and that will just leave behind the vertices. Now, they're just vertices in terms of three-dimensional information that is stored in the model. They really have no other info on them whatsoever. They are literally just points. And to actually turn them into something useful in layout, we need to do one more step. So let's take a moment and go to the Create tab. And under here, you'll see a few sections that have these drop-down windows. So there's tools that are hidden in here. So let's go and grab under polygons. We're going to make 1-point polygons. Now, this is going to essentially turn these points into 1-point polygons so they'd be rendered. Now, this is one of the bizarre but more interesting things about Lightwave is that it has the ability to do this. A lot of other 3D programs do not. So let's take this and save that. And we'll go to our Jitter tool, go to Objects. We'll call this Star Sphere. Okay, so we're going to use that as just a temporary backup here. Now I'm going to undo what I've done with that create point step and save it as a different object. And I'll show you the difference between the two. All right, so let's send this over to layout. Okay, so we're going to send that object over. And we can see that in the perspective view or any other view, we can't see anything unless it's in vertices mode. And the vertices can be represented. We can attach things to these vertices, such as instances, hypervoxels, a number of different things, but they will not render. And the reason being is they really don't exist. They're just kind of there. Think infinitesimally small particles that no matter how close you got to them would not show up unless you applied something to them. So let's go and just take a look at what this would look like in render. And you will be stunned because it doesn't look like anything. They are not there. So unless I applied a instancing system to it, possibly flocking, hypervoxels, something to give it some actual data so that the renderer can pick it up, it's not going to pick it up. But that's okay because we've gone and made the sphere into 1-point polygons. So we can go and load the version that did have it with that extra step. And now we have points that will render. And this is great because no matter how close you get to them, they will always remain the same size. So they will always feel like distant stars. Under their object properties, though, you do have a little bit of the ability to control how they look. If you want to do nodal displacement, you can change them, obviously, as far as their mesh. And under the Edges tab, you do have the control of particle or line thickness. Now, this function corresponds to a setting in the render engine itself. So we'll go to the render properties window. Let's bring this in here for a second. And there's a function in here under render called render lines. This should really be rendered lines and or particles, but because they're points, maybe it should be named rendered lines and points. But you can see when I turn that on or off, it's going to basically disable it from the scene. Okay? And this being enabled, you go to 0, or you can go and grab one of these presets here, small, medium, large. And of course, if you want to do your own control over it, let's go 25, and you see that you get a big batch of spheres. These can be shaded, of course. They do have surfaces to them, but they just are effectively little virtual spheres that the particle line thickness system is telling Lightwave's renderer, because this is enabled, to render them as. You just go to 1 pixel. There you go. 25 pixels. And again, as we move the camera, their size will not change. They will always remain 25 pixels no matter what you do. Kind of a neat thing if you want to do some motion graphics. It's kind of a handy little bit. Let's go and do something a little bit more sophisticated here. And turn this back to 1 pixel. Okay. And jumping back over to Modeler, as I said, we could do multiple layers of stars so we get more stars, and there's a really easy way to build what we called star balls back in my days in the space shows like Battlestar Galactica or Iron Sky. And this is what we would do. We take that first base one, we give it a surface name. It says no data active. Well, there is data active. Let's go to the surface editor, and we're going to rename it, and we're going to call it stars yellow bright. Okay. So we're going to turn the specular value right off. We don't need that. And we're going to give them some luminosity. And we'll go and give this a base color of something in the orange-yellow range. And of course, a little bit of luminosity can't hurt. Boom. With a little bit of color variance. And we don't even need the principal shader here, but because the standard shader was the way that we used to do this, we'll go with the standard shader. Same thing if I want to flip that back around. Pick it a color, yellow, orange, whatever it might be. Let's crank up that luminosity. Turn everything else off because they don't need to be there. They don't have a side to them, so they don't need to have double-sided enabled. But now that we've got that, let's take this whole point sphere, select all of them, keep jumping back into polygon mode. There we go. Let's copy these, go Control C, put them in another layer, Control V, give them some additional size, maybe make them a little bit bigger, and run that jitter tool again. And we'll go boom, boom, and now they are going to look completely different than the ones in the background. We go and give these a different surface name. Fortunately, there's no active data for that. We'd have to do them in points or in polygons first, and then change them over. Or we can save them as different objects. let's see if we can do this with another trick that we don't know here. Let's go to um, K or P to make the polygons. We need to have this point selected first. So we're going to hit P. It's going to draw all those polygons back in. We see that we've got lines now in between. Those lines would show up in render if we looked at them, but now we can apply a texture to it or a surface name. So we'll call these stars white bright. Okay, boom, boom. Okay, and then we can kill those polygons again and go to create more polygons. They show up again, and now we've got a sphere. So we'll save it. Jump back over to modeler or to Lightwave layout, and now we've got more stars in here, and we've got effectively something that can be textured differently. So let's go and apply a slightly different texture to this. Stars white bright. Let's go standard. 100, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And we'll change this one over. Standard. Make these ones yellow, whatever they might be. And now we've got some stars there. So we can now take these two sets of star layers. Let's turn this one off. Let's turn this one off for a second. So I don't think we need this one here. That's the one we don't want. So let's delete that. Turn these ones back on. Parent one to the other. And we can now scale these up if necessary. And we've got stars in the background. And these will, of course, blur with motion blur. So enabling with the camera. We'll go and turn particle and motion blur on. Let's go that way. Aha. Let's go 4 and 16. And let's do some keyframing here, just to rotate our camera a little bit. And let's hit F9. And these things will now blur. So it works very well as a star field generator. Of course, you could map this to, say, a sphere, make a spherical image out of it. You can have different values, different luminosity values. The only thing to be aware of with something like this is that they will flicker a little bit, because if they're not big enough, they won't anti-alias properly. You need to give them possibly a little bit of thickness, and or just better motion blur samples and steps. So let's hit F9, wham wham, and now we've got blurred stars, but they darken a little bit. If you don't have Star Pro, this is your solution to create background stars. There's also a procedural texture way to do this, but I like to work with the star ball system because I can scale it, doesn't take any geometry up, and when you do it right, it'll show up in OpenGL, no problem. So you can do previs, and you can see what's going on with your stars. It's great. And if you need to pop them onto a scene and then plug some instances onto them, no problem. Very easy. All right. Thank you for watching.